We love South.
Hello and welcome everybody to a quick video here to introduce our Raider Clubs. Raider Clubs are going to be this Friday. They're a collection of all sorts of different activities, games, projects that you can work on. You'll be able to pick which Raider Club you'd like to go to as long as it's not full. We have lots of different options for you. I'm going to go through each of them right now, and you'll get a chance to pick those throughout the week. So, first up, I have Sphero races with Mr. Meyer. A Sphero is kind of a robotic ball that you control with an iPad. We'll have some obstacle courses set up. We'll have some races against each other. All around, some good fun with that. Next up, we have giant board games with Mrs. Shields. So we have a lot of giant board games here in our school, and you'll get a chance to play each of those with Mrs. Shields. Next up, we have Slime Makers Club with Mrs. Guth. If you've ever made slime before, here's another opportunity to do so. If you haven't, this is a great chance. So Mrs. Guth has got the ooey gooey slime. Next up, we have soap carving with Mrs. Brown. You can channel your inner Michelangelo and create a beautiful creation out of a bar of soap. Next up, we have a science experiment called Frankenworms with Ms. May. And so using those gummy worms, you're going to be doing a kind of a cool science experiment with them. Next up, we have Mrs. Schneider and Ms. Whitty with Minute to Win It games. These are all games that are fast-paced, take a minute or less, a lot of fun, a lot of laughs. Next up, we have the Building Masters Club with Mrs. Blue. All sorts of building materials and some new building kind of robots as well. Marshmallow Builders with Mrs. Reamers. You're going to be using some toothpicks and marshmallows to create something cool. How big can you go using just those materials? Next up is Making Lemonade with Mrs. Brower. And so in that classroom, you're going to be making your own glass or jar of that nice, refreshing drink lemonade. Next up, we have a Pumpkin Catapult with Mrs. Lee. A nice little fall-themed one here. Being able to shoot some pumpkins, smash pumpkins, maybe, I guess. We'll have to see. Next up is Straw Rockets with Mrs. Heller. You'll be creating some rockets that you can shoot using your own breath and a straw. We have Sensory Bottles with Mrs. Watchhorn. You'll be creating these very serene and calming sensory bottles, something kind of cool to take home with you once your club is finished. Next up, a new one, Tie-Dye Shirts with Mrs. Wern. So creating some awesome looking shirts in tie-dye format. Very cool stuff. Then we have the Groovy Music Makers with Mrs. Michelman. You'll be using the Q Grooves software on her Quaver program to create your own music. Next up is Soapy Monsters with Ms. Larson. You'll be creating some monsters out of, you guessed it, soap. Next up is the Ninja Warrior course with Mr. Dorsey. Mr. Dorsey will have a nice little obstacle course set up in the gym, ready for you to run through, see how fast you can go. Then we have the Ice Cream Makers with Mrs. Pittum. What a sweet club, especially after you make your own. Always taste the best. Next up, we have Virtual Sticker Boards with Mrs. Ramsey. So this is kind of like pixel art where you create a picture and then you work as partners to kind of decipher what it actually is. So Virtual Sticker Boards with Mrs. Ramsey. Then we have a painting club with Senora Maturina. So you'll be painting away. Get that inner artist out in you and get a chance to show off your creativity. So those are the clubs that you can pick through. We will have these clubs on Friday. We'll have them in the morning on Friday. So throughout the week, you'll be picking clubs a few people at a time. If one of your clubs that you wanted to go with first gets picked or filled up, that's okay, because you will have fun at any one of these that you go to. We have a great lineup of those clubs for you, and we'll be excited to have you do those and have some fun. So this Friday, Raider Clubs, everybody. Have a fantastic week.